sure. This is my friend Greg Brown and my new friend Marley. Greg's a dog lover, and he's trained with police dogs and self-defense dogs and attack dogs. And being in that culture, he's met a lot of people who have done the opposite with dogs and trained them to fight. And he's known people who've trained fighting dogs and fighting dogs themselves. And he is very knowledgeable in the whole culture and the history of the pit bull and fighting in general. I mean, I had a lot of stereotypes in my head about dog fighting, and he's put them to rest and told me a lot about the history that I had no clue about. I thought dog fighting was a new fad, but it's been around for hundreds of years, so I'll let Greg tell you the history.
All right. Well, just this outline is just the brief bit is talking points, and the rest of it is some other information I've gathered. There's state guide. Don't mind him. There's a state guideline list in here where it has everything as being marked as a felony, what's a misdemeanor, and what's legal. And just, you guys have seen Marley, you guys have seen how he is with strangers. Owning this dog is a felony in the state of Massachusetts. Owning this dog is a felony in the state of New Hampshire. Owning this dog is a felony in about 35 other states. The training of a fighting dog is a felony in most states. In very few states is it even legal to watch a dog fight or be a participant at an event. It's illegal in all 50 states. There's just some other smaller stuff in here. Rewards for information on dog fighting. And then there'll be a couple other things I'm going to touch on as we move on with this. But I'll start off with the brief history of dog fighting. People have fought animals for thousands of years. The best case of this would be the Colosseum. They used to have the Roman war dog. It was 3 war dogs to a lion, 4 war dogs to a bear. And they'd fight them for the enjoyment of the Colosseum. Moving along, we're going to start looking at the development of pit bulls and dog fighting, because the two are synonymous, because the development of the dog parallels the development of the fighting. And the majority of the dog fighting that developed these dogs was in the UK, Ireland, and then eventually the last 150 years has been in the United States. The development started with ratting and badger baiting, where you take a smaller game terrier and you put it in a pen with 20, 30 rats and see how many it could kill as quickly as possible. People would bet on it. It was originally designed as a test of gameness. Now, gameness is something that you'll hear a lot about talked about with these dogs. And gameness is the willingness for a dog to continue to fight and maintain a certain level of intensity on a goal all the way through. Fighting dogs is called dead game, because this dog in Marley has unfortunately been proven to be a dead game dog. He will fight until he dies. He won't stop. There's nothing that can slow him down. They try to do the same thing with smaller terriers for keeping houses free of rats, and eventually for the hunting of badgers. So people would selectively breed for dogs that were aggressive towards smaller animals. That's why you get Jack Russell Terriers that are absolutely insane. Everyone thinks they're small, cute, little fuzzy animals, but they're a handful. Any terrier is driven, no matter what kind it is. Might be scared of people, but it's driven to catch something. If it moves, they're going to chase it. You start breeding for the gameness, for the aggression, and you see people start breeding for a certain skeletal type even. With dogs that were involved in badger baiting, they started breeding for dogs with slightly sunken-in eyes, with a higher subcranial ridge to protect their eyes from when a badger would gouge at their face, prevent the dog from going blind. Moving along, the bear baiting, and that developed for the Mastiff breeds, because what ended up happening was that the Mastiffs were used in the 1600s in Europe as castle and estate guardians. Now, you can't generally find a man who's going to subject himself to fighting a dog to test to see if the dog will do its job. So they figured we can catch a bear and make it stand on 2 legs, chain it to a wall, hit it with an oar if it decides to play around a little bit too much. And you started developing these as working tests for the dogs, as a breed suitability test pretty much. And that bred along, and that was in the 1600s, and kind of fell out of favor as the industrialization of the world happened. As things became less and less rural and more urban, no one really needed these bigger Mastiff bear baiting dogs, so they fell out of favor. In the early 1700s, the development and the popularity of bull baiting in the UK exploded. Now, originally what ended up happening was somebody figured out the best way to breed a bulldog was to breed what's originally thought as a white Highland Terrier with a Mastiff, and that's where you get the original strain of these dogs. And just for a matter of it was actually discovered the best way to breed these dogs and to get consistent results out of your breedings was 26 generations of breedings that were either hit or miss, and there was no middle ground. Bull baiting was both popular and legal. There were 3 bull baiting pens in downtown London that baited bulls twice a day. The bull would have usually a handful of powder blown up its nose and it'd be chained to a post, and then let the dogs go and see if the dog grab it by the snout and hold it. And the dog held the longest from getting flipped around was the winner. And it was a breed suitability test. Mr. Perkins, I tried as hard as I could to find the guy's actual name. This is a paper published in 1632 called Cases of Consciousness. And it's a pretty good quote to show you what the outlook on bull baiting was in Europe at that point in time. It's right here on this talking points. That was actually illegal to slaughter a bull in England unless it had been baited, because they figured out that once the bull was in a fight with a dog, their muscles would fill with blood, and it actually made the meat taste better. Because at that point, we weren't dealing with domesticated livestock. You were typically dealing with 3/4 or half wild animals. And one of the biggest things that a bulldog would do, or a butcher's dog would do, is if a bull broke out of a pen and started running through the city goring people, it's a heavy liability for the butcher. It's a heavy liability for anybody. So a good bulldog was considered a hero, because those dogs would stop a bull from running through the town killing people. And that would typically happen in an urban environment. Now, but with the change of livestock to being slightly more docile, less aggressive, smaller horns, and just overall being an easier animal to deal with, bull baiting fell out of favor and actually was finally put to an end with the Cruelty of Animals Act of 1835, which is an act of Parliament, and it forbade any kind of fighting or baiting of any animal whatsoever. Now, an interesting fact, the English bulldog that everybody's seen as the AKC shows, the cute little things, the scruffy face that everybody says that's what an English bulldog was. That breed wasn't developed until a few decades. I think it was about 50 or 60 years before you start seeing anything like that considered a bulldog. And if you look at paintings, or mostly paintings from the 1600s of bulldogs, not one of them looks like one of those short little, can't get out of their own way English bulldog. Now, dog fighting really came into its own after that happened, after the Animal Cruelty Act, because what ended up happening was people no longer needed bulldogs, but they had dogs that were game. So what would happen was people wanted something small that they could keep in the house, could protect the kids against rats and different smaller animals that invade the smaller houses and infest the homes. So they started breeding for dogs like this, and that could also fight a man if possible, if needed. And the breeding suitability test that they picked out was matching 2 dogs against each other. Now, originally this is being done as an idea of seeing if the dogs had pure gameness, to see if the dogs would fight, and that was it. They'd do it once, maybe twice, and that would be the end of it. Because you'd never want to risk the life of a dog that you could breed to make money off of, because this dog's dead game and I know it is. And you can advertise that when selling puppies. So it was really driven, dogfighting was really driven by the idea of making money breeding dogs. And this is, early to mid 1800s all the way up through the 1900s. Dogfighting was outlawed in the UK, but it was done anyway. It was legal and sanctioned in the United States up until the early 1900s. In fact, if you were looking in 1905, if you're looking for a place to go see a good dog fight, go to Boston. The best fighting dogs in the world were imported into the city of Boston. In fact, one of the most prolific game dog breeders in the United States is the Colby family of Newburyport, where they kept a house or a barn for fighting gamecocks, a house for fighting dogs, and then the house for the family. And to this day, they're on their 20th generation of dogs, and there's a nice little statistic that a 20-generation pedigree for a puppy has 2,097,152 ancestors in it. That's how many dogs have gone through that house since 1889. Continued legislation has led to dogfighting being a crime in every state and a felony in most. The biggest hit to the underground world of dogfighting was definitely the arrest of Floyd Boudreaux and his son Guy Boudreaux of Louisiana. Floyd Boudreaux was the dog man of the mid-1900s. Like, you see pictures from the 50s. He's in his 70s now. He's up for 57 felony counts of animal cruelty, and those 57 counts are carrying a 10-year charge each. So it's a life sentence for him. His son will be charged with the same thing. It was, mostly for transporting fighting dogs over state lines, mostly federal cases. They're going away forever. And the sad part about that was they euthanized every single adult dog on his yard. And they said, because it's the very common misconception that a dog that's been fought or a dog that's been trained to fight or bred to fight is dangerous. That's where Marley comes into this little speech. And this is the second biggest thing to happen. One of the worst things to happen to the pit bull and period is not so much the dog fighting by guys like that, because 1950, 1930, if you're going to a dog fight, you're wearing a suit. If you're in the pit with your dog, you're wearing a suit. It wasn't done in back alleys. The name of the game wasn't cruelty at that point in time. It's one of the things that's been really blown out of proportion. A lot of it has to do with the hip-hop culture that has embraced these dogs because they're tough and impressive-looking dogs, and people torture them to get them to be guard dogs. These dogs are not human aggressive. For 250 years, these dogs were bred selectively for zero tolerance for human aggression. Because in a dog fight, you have to break the two dogs off of each other, and at the height of intensity, if that dog turned and bit a handler, they would legitimately take it out of the pit and shoot it in the back. And that'd be the end of it. Those dogs were not tolerated. They were culled instantly. Purebred, line-bred, traditionally bred fighting dogs like Marley are a non-issue as far as human aggression goes. It's the big problem with that is the sensationalization of dog bites on the news. And the biggest problem with that is if you look at how many people are bit by pit bulls annually, it's less than 1/4 the amount of people that are bit by Springer Spaniels, Cocker Spaniels. They bite 3 times as many people as pit bulls do. The only problem is when your dog has the muscles in its mouth that looks like it swallowed half of a tennis ball on each side of its cheek, it does a lot more damage. And what ended up happening is that people have punished these dogs based on the actions of their irresponsible owners. A responsible owner, doesn't matter what kind of dog it is, you would never leave a child alone with a dog. A responsible owner would have appropriate steps to keep a dog from escaping a yard. And a lot of people assume that since they have a pit bull and it's friendly and it's nice, it doesn't mean that that dog isn't, a lot of people have been, a lot of children that have been bitten by pit bulls, it's been out of prey drive. There's a couple different ways of looking at it. Dogs in general operate on prey drive and defense drive, and everything else from there is kind of a derivative. Food drives based off of prey, aggressions based off of defense. Those are the two main drives as the way that animals work. Cats are a perfect example of an animal that is 100% pure prey drive, because a cat will run at the first sight of trouble. Fight or flight. Now, what ends up happening with these dogs is that they have an enormous amount of prey drive. All their training, everything that they do is based off of the idea of the chase and getting themselves to a point where they can get whatever it is, and that's what their goal is, because if it moves fast, they want to chase it, they want to jump on it, they want to put their mouth on it, because that's what they do. These dogs weren't pets. These dogs are working dogs for 200 years. And the fact that they've been brought in and guys cut their ears off, which was never done in dogfighting circles. They never cropped the ears because the ears are actually cooling fins. If you look at the bigger the dog, usually has bigger and floppier ears for the simple reason that dogs only sweat through the pads of their feet and their mouth. So they pump all their blood through their ears to cool them off. The best way to find out if a dog's overheated is to grab a hold of his ears. See how hot they are. If a dog's, if a dog's dead cold, you grab their ears are not that warm, and you can actually see the veins expand and contract if you have a dog with bigger ears and a lighter skin pigment. So that would never be done. They'd never cut the tail off those dogs because that was never done, but that's also something because people want a tougher looking dog. Dog has no tail, dog has no ears. Now you can't read its body language whatsoever. Can't tell if it's wagging its tail, can't tell if its ears are back, can't tell if its ears are at half rows, nothing. You put a big 2-inch wide spiked leather collar on it and a giant heavy chain around it, which is detrimental to the dog's health. It destroys the dog's neck and the spine. It is a huge cause of deteriorating osteoporosis in pit bulls that have been walked on a heavy chain their whole life, is that it pulls down so much on the neck and will actually cause spinal erosion in their necks. One of the most the two most visible arrests as far as dogfighting goes was the rapper DMX was arrested and charged and convicted on 2 counts of animal cruelty for starving animals for the 25 animals he had in kennels that were full of urine and feces in his basement, and obviously Michael Vick. That's the one thing, Michael Vick is getting a slap on the wrist compared to what other guys have gotten. Floyd and Guy LeBeau, old school dogmen, one of the things that they were arrested with was enough injectable euthanizing agents to kill every dog in that yard. Michael Vick strangled his dogs, hung them, and drowned them in 5-gallon buckets. There's levels of cruelty that are everything involved in the art of dog and the sport of dogfighting, or as they romanticize it and call it the fancy. Everything about it is cruel. It's not done. The dogs do it because they love the person that's their handler. They will go to the death for you. You put them in that pit, that dog's going to fight because you put them there. These dogs have been bred for 200 years for animal aggression. So an uneducated person with I bought my first dog. What do you get? A pit bull. That's a bad idea. That's just a bad idea all the way around. Rescue a pit bull. You rescued a cute little 6-month-old pit bull puppy because, let's face it, they're cute as hell. And you rescue a 6-month-old dog at 9 months, all of a sudden it wants to kill everything on 4 legs. Most of the time you'll never see that aggression change from dogs to people. And anytime there was a dog like that, they were put down. Those were what are considered breedings of curs. A cur dog is a dog that wouldn't fight, that would give up, jump the pen, and run. Now, what has happened since people they've been improperly breeding these dogs because they're a fad breed, is that you've started to see dogs that are bred from animals that would never have been bred 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 years ago, what are now being put into the gene pool. So now you're starting to get the development of traits that have been bred out of these dogs put back into the bloodlines. So purebred fighting dogs like this don't have human aggression. He may very well protect somebody in a life or death situation, but a golden retriever would probably protect somebody in the same life and death situation. The thing you have to worry about with these dogs is small 4-legged animals. Cats, squirrels, possums, skunks. Those are a very big part of this. So kind of touched on threats to the pit bull worldwide. One of the biggest ones, of course, is breed-specific legislation. Like they call it an ordinance in Boston, but it's a ban. Let's be very, very honest about it. When you're required to spay or neuter your dog at your own cost, you're not allowed to own more than one. What other fun ones are there? Has to have a muzzle on at all times, be leashed at all times, Anytime that dog is out of your actual house, so he's in my apartment, muzzle's off, no big deal. He goes in the backyard, muzzle has to go on. Now, the one thing I've been waiting for, which hasn't happened yet, is the pit bull owner whose dog is mauled by a dog-aggressive Malamute, Husky, Akita, or any of the 20 or 30 other breeds that are very prone to animal aggression. And as soon as that dog gets mauled and doesn't have the tools to defend itself, City of Boston will have their lawsuit. Because you've effectively taken away the ability of the dog to defend itself. It's like declawing cats. You know, a lot of places consider that cruel because the cat can no longer defend itself. Same thing with these dogs. And the blanket term pit bull that is put on these dogs is also very unfair. Included in that pit bull ban in Boston is a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. Marley here is 68 pounds. A Staffordshire Bull Terrier is no more than 26 pounds. It's pretty much a milk crate with little stubby legs because they're kind of built that way. They're about that wide and about that tall. They have always been, since the 1800s, considered the stay-at-home brother to these dogs. Those were the dogs that you saw in homes. My grandfather had 2 of them that he brought over from Ireland. We have pictures in the house of him with, this is 1930s, 1940s. You have pictures of him with 2 small red Staffordshire Bull Terriers. They're a home dog, they're a house dog. The second being people who, fad breeding, which we've already talked about, people who deal with a hip-hop culture. Also something that they've done that's been extremely detrimental to these dogs is pit bulls were never supposed to be bigger than 65, maybe 70 pounds. 70 pounds would be a freak. But those big blue pit bulls, those blue whales that have now verged on the point of being so wide in the chest that they're no longer agile, they're no longer mobile, and they weigh 120 pounds. Those aren't pit bulls. Those are something completely different. A working pit bull is lean, agile, and fast. Now, nationwide, there are more than a few organizations. Most local organizations will offer rewards for people who have information on dog fighting and leading to an arrest, or even more money is involved if it leads to a conviction. Humane Society, I have a couple listed here. Humane Society, the Defense of Animals offers a $2,500 reward for an animal that's been stolen, mostly for pit bulls, for the specific reason that people will steal pit bulls to fight them. And next thing I have on this list here, I think it's on the 3rd page or 4th page, is the list of items considered de facto proof of dog fighting. Now this has been put out, and this is pretty much a standard list. This one in particular is taken from the Oregon Humane Society, but this is pretty much a standard list, whether you're looking at the MSPCA, the ASPCA, Humane Society of America, most local rescue organizations. This list is a standard. And just read over it, and I'll touch on each one. One of them is multiple pit bulls in one yard with locked and/or privacy gates. Now the big problem with this is that if you have more than one pit bull, you are going to have a locked gate on your yard. You're going to have privacy fences, because those dogs, you can have kennel fights. 2 dogs on each side of a fence. You look at me, and we're going to fight through the fence and probably break all of our teeth off in the process. But privacy fences, the dogs can smell each other, they just can't see each other, which is the inciting factor. You have a privacy locked fence, you're right, you do. If you're a serious breeder of any dog, I know guys who train dogs for, my friend John, who trained my dog, I've worked with and done decoy work with for police departments. He trains 45% of the dogs for the U.S. Customs Department. He has a yard of dogs that are, each individual dog is sold for $5,000 a piece, 30 to 40 dogs at a time. And these are all obviously these are Malinois or Shepherds. These are police dogs, but the same thing. John has 10-foot privacy fences and 2 sets of locked gates before you even get to the kennel yard. That's responsible dog ownership. Pit bulls with short cropped ears wearing 2-inch wide collars. I think I've covered this part. Those are fads. A lot of dogs have 2-inch collars. Marley's wearing one right now. My dog at home wears one for the specific reason, with a dog that's this strong and this powerful, if he decides he's going to hit the end of the leash and he's got a 1/2-inch wide nylon slide or nylon choke, he can crush bones in his throat. A 2-inch wide collar like this distributes the pressure on their neck, and it's actually safer for the dog. You won't find a police dog that didn't start its training out wearing a 2-inch wide collar. that's a standard for all working dogs. Dogs with scars on their head, their throat, and their legs and ears. That's a pretty universal. My dog, never been, not a dog aggressive animal, has been attacked in the past. He has 3 scars. If you push his fur aside, he has 3 deep scars on his shoulder from getting bit in the shoulder and locked onto. A dog goes running through the brush. If it's, gets out in a more rural area, your dog will come back with scars from running through the brush. I'm sure there's enough briars and thorn bushes out there to cut your dog up pretty good. Dogs can also be attacked being the cause of the scars. Dog might not be involved in the fight at all. You might have a pit bull that wants nothing to do with fighting another dog, and another dog gets loose and mauls your dog. Your dog's going to be scarred. Tires are leather suspended several feet off the ground to provide jaw strengthening activities. This is exercise. It's called a spring pole. Now, the typical way of doing it is you hang usually an inner tube over a branch, a garage door spring from that, and a piece of rope connected to some sort of tug toy, whether it's a piece of jute, a sleeve cover. A lot of people use those for like the big sleeves that you see the canines biting. They'll use a sleeve cover, or they'll use a piece of raw cowhide. Now, not rawhide that you buy in a store, legitimately just a scraped off and treated piece of cow fur. There's hair on it, whole 9 yards, and it's durable, and these dogs can chew on it forever. And all they do, and this is actually something that they've been doing for a long time, it simulates the bulldog's drive to grab the bull and to shake. So it grabs a hold of the tug, it shakes, the spring bounces them side to side, and the dog loves it. There's actually some good pictures. I'm going to give a couple websites and a couple books if you guys want a little more information at the end of this. And one of the websites actually has a woman who set up a spring pole that's 14 feet tall to the spring, and it shows the dog swinging 18 feet off the ground. Because they will do it until the only way you're getting them off the spring pole is to tell them to get off, and because typically they'll just sit there and shake it all day long because it's fun. And it's exercise for these dogs. You have a hyperactive working terrier, which is what the pit bull is. You need exercise for the dog. I don't know how many people have an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning and at night to properly exercise an animal like this. Not many. That also goes for treadmills. Treadmills are the other big one that people say is, if you get a treadmill, you're fighting dogs. If you have a treadmill and a pit bull, you're fighting dogs. You won't find a single German Shepherd breeder in the world, a serious one, who shows their dogs that doesn't have a treadmill at their kennel to analyze gait and to exercise their dogs. I know a dog breeder who's in Boston, a dog trainer in Boston who does a lot of work with the Boston Police Department, and at the training school, there's a treadmill in the corner. You have dogs that come in for the doggy daycare. Instead of leaving them out in a pen where it's open and you encourage dog fights, which is another bit of irresponsible breeding. Everybody assumes that if you send the dog off to doggy daycare, you put them in a big yard with a bunch of other dogs, it's a great idea. It's a terrible idea. It's nothing bad about anything in particular, but it's just environments like that and dog parks initiate dog fights. Those are a great way to start a dog fight. And typically with collies or the normal dogs that you see in places like that, that's not a big deal. You can't do that with dogs like this. Dog looks at another one crossed, and that's going to be a serious fight. And these dogs, most people will say, okay, well, I'm going to break up a dog fight, throw water on them. You get 2 pit bulls fighting or 2 bulldogs fighting, you throw water on them, you've just extended the fight by 45 minutes because you've cooled them down. You put water on their skin, it's going to cool them off even faster. They're going to transfer the heat out of their body and into the air a lot faster. So legitimately, you have to physically break the dogs off one another. And I have a good friend of mine his name's Mac. He lives in southern Maine. He homes dogs. He kennels dogs for the Maine State Police. And a Maine State Police canine bit his thumb off while he was trying to break up a fence fight involving the dog. Because a police canine will most certainly turn around and bite a person. His American Bulldog wouldn't think of it. Dogs leashed with heavy chains to metal posts in the ground with or without weights on their collars. I've already gone over the idea of weights in the collars. Now, the idea of somebody tying a dog out on a chain is a slightly different story. Because now instead of If I'm walking him on a 4-foot piece of chain that's this thick and weighs 35, 40 pounds, all the weight goes from my hand directly to the dog's neck. If the dog's tied out on a chain, that chain drags on the ground. He might have 8 links, might weigh 2 to 6 pounds hanging on his neck. Not a big deal, but that is a safe way to keep a dog. It's usually a car axle, and they'll embed it 4 feet into the ground, loop the chain, and put a permanent link in it so the dog can't break it. And that's usually inside of a fenced-in enclosure on top of that, for the specific reason that one dog breaks a chain and it's going to go and start fights with whoever it's been barking at all day long because it builds frustration. That's heavy metal chains and posts are actually a responsible way of handling a yard with more than one pit bull on it. Dogs being frequently moved in cages from a house. Again, see any serious dog breeder. Any serious dog breeder is going to be moving stud dogs in, stud dogs out. You're moving puppies in, puppies out. All the time, all hours of the day, all year long. Dogs and people frequently coming and going from site gathered in unusual places such as an abandoned house, empty warehouse, residential basement, and barns. All right, there's no argument with that. If you see a bunch of guys with scarred up pit bulls walking into a barn, walking out 2 hours later, there was a dog fight in that barn. That's pretty much, they got that one nail on the head on that one. Dogs forced to pull heavy items such as chains and tire rims to strengthen muscles. All right, this is a really big misconception that people assume that it's a sport. There are weight pull organizations for dogs. There are titles for weight pulling. I've seen 13-pound Patterdale Terriers pull 7 times their own body weight. I've seen, pit bulls. I've put my dog on a sled. I watched him pull 1,300 pounds from a dead stop. So it's not like that doesn't happen. Huskies, Malamutes, sled dogs, they were bred for same thing. They weren't bred to fight animals. They were bred to pull things. Those dogs benefit from that type of work. And I don't know anybody who wants a fat, lazy dog at the house, or you want a dog that you can run with. Exercising your dog in a way that is appropriate for the dog and makes the dog happy doesn't involve any abuse, doesn't involve any kind of physical contact, nothing that's detrimental to the dog. Dog's stronger, dog's worked out, and the dog's happy. Extreme uncontrollable aggression towards other animals, especially other dogs. This goes back to the idea of if you have a pit bull, you have to accept the fact that there's 200 years worth of genetics saying that this dog is going to be animal aggressive. And it's typically only dog aggressive. There's hundreds of cases of pit bulls coexisting perfectly fine with cats. There's actually one of Diana Jessup, who's a very famous person as far as rescuing pit bulls and trying to dispel some of the myths. She rescues animals of all types. And she rescued a baby harbor seal. And one of her pit bulls there's pictures of it in the pen with it, teaching the seal how to catch live trout. There's a small pen about this deep, filled with trout, harbor seal, dog waiting around, the dog snatching him up. The harbor seal figures it out from watching the dog. These dogs are typically dog aggressive. That's an accepted fact. You get a pit bull, you will most likely have to deal with a dog that might not like other dogs. Typically, you can get away with, if you have a male pit bull, you can have them around females of anything. Some female pit bulls, obviously, you can't have them around because they'll be aggressive as well. It doesn't matter if they're male or female because the females tend to go into or try to fight with males, where males will typically try to fight with males because it's usually it's a modified trait. That dog aggression is a hierarchical manner of fighting. You take a dog that would typically fight for dominance in a pack, and now you've just hyper-focused it. So now it doesn't matter if it's for the attention of the pack, for the leadership of the pack. The dogs want to fight because they want to fight. Don't let them, because it's obviously not in the best interest of anybody. The presence of a cat, rabbit, or other small animal the dog is encouraged to chase as a reward, and for its hard work, the dog may be permitted to capture and kill the confined animal. This is based off the idea of a cat mill or a jenny mill, which is typically a post in the middle, a counterweight on one side, the dog tied to a leash, and directly in front of it, it's almost like the carrot leading the donkey. It's a cat in a cage. Dog chases the cat in the cage, mill goes round and round and round, dog runs for hours and hours and hours, and you reward the dog with some sort of positive reinforcement, so once upon a time you'd let the cat out of the cage and let the dog kill it. This is also nail on the head. If you have a cage full of rabbits and a Jenny mill with a cage on it, you probably got some dog fighting going on. There are ways to run a Jenny mill where it's a nice, easy way, because unlike a treadmill where the dog's confined to running in one space, the Jenny mill is actually better for their joints and better for their overall health because it's a natural running progression. They're running on dirt. They're running on their own power at their own speed. They can adjust a little better for terrain. So what ends up happening is that you can hang, for Marley, it would be a strip of rawhide in front of him. He will chase that and chase that and chase that. But if you have a Jenny mill, you will most certainly get a call from the MSPCA within a few days. And in a circumstance where a lot of guys that I know that have pit bulls or American bulldogs, where a dog gets injured and the wound even resembles something that might have happened in a fight, they won't take their dogs to the vet because that vet will report you to the MSPCA. And in a lot of cases, these people have their children taken because dog fighting is detrimental to everybody. And a lot of people who are involved in the sport let kids watch it. And it becomes a child welfare issue at that point. And you see a lot of people who are involved in, I'll get into that in a minute, hog hunting down south, where there was a big bust in 05 or 06 with a group of guys that were doing hog hunts. So what you do is you take a pen maybe twice the size of where I'm standing now, put a hog fence around it, put a wild boar in the middle, and see whose dog would catch it and hold it the fastest, and people would bet on it. And typically in South Carolina, at the one event that I went to that I watched for about 45 seconds before I became disgusted with it and left, it's held in the city square, and the guy running it is the sheriff. So there is no oversight by law on that one. The law is involved in that one. And the hogs are pretty much bit by 20, 30 dogs at a time. Ears hanging by a thread. Cruelty on another level. But at the same time, the dogs are wearing Kevlar, pretty much a Kevlar bulletproof vest from the back of their neck to just past their rib cage to protect them from getting gored by the cutters in the wild boar. But at the same time, you still see dogs die doing it. Now there's that aspect of it, which is the catch contest, and then there's legitimate catch hunting, where a guy, his pit bull, American bulldog, whatever your catch dog is, and maybe a hound, go out into the woods, and your hounds track a wild boar, and your dog goes in and grabs it, and you run in with a 12-inch long Bowie knife, and you kill it by hand. This is more of the lines of legitimate hunting, because you assume the same risk as the dog does. This isn't dog fighting where there's no risk to you. You have no, there's a complete disconnect in safety, where those dogs are fighting in the pit, nothing's happening to you no matter what happens. You go out there, it's you and the dog working together for a hunt. That's a little bit more legitimate, and that's why that's still legal in, I think, 12 or 13 states. Most states actually won't let you hunt with a dog in general, unless it's a bird dog. All right, and the last little bit of this is the Cajun Rules. The Cajun Rules are what all dog fights are based on these days. It's pretty much it's legitimate rule structure on how these fights are operated, from who the referee is, how the dogs work, the pen itself, dimensions, size, and legitimately, if you read the very last rule on the last page, it's, should the police interfere, the referee to name the next meeting place. And these are the Cajun Rules. These are written in the early 1900s. These are a very modern interpretation of how these fights are handled. Now, just a quick example of what these would look like. This would be about the size of the pit, maybe a little bit smaller. The wall's about 2 feet high, so it's about right. And 12 feet apart, there'd be a pair of lines. Now, they're called scratch lines. What ends up happening, this is pretty much the dynamics of what happens before a dog fight. I come in with my dog, you come in with your dog. They're weighed out, it's weight classed, it's like boxing, but a little more extreme where it's to the ounce. You have plus or minus 1 ounce on a agreed upon weight. You weigh the dogs in, I hand you my dog, you hand me yours. I'm gonna wash your dog in usually milk because it will neutralize anything you might have put on the dog's fur. There are more than a couple stories of people coating the backs of their dog's neck or their legs in benzene, and dogs getting toxically and fatally poisoned by biting the other dog and absorbing the benzene because it goes directly into the bloodstream through the tongue. I wash your dog, you wash mine. One of my assistants walks your dog to you and then is attached to you at the hip, and vice versa. We come back out, there's no collars, no leashes. No collars, no leashes, no control. We each have a breaking stick, which is usually, I meant to bring one today, but I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to pick up Marley, and certain things got forgotten. That was one of them. It's usually made of a hardwood, so like oak, or usually maple, because it's a little bit softer, and if you turn it, you won't break the dog's teeth. And it's a wedge about this long, tapers to a point, and it has a distal taper to it as far as its thickness. Now what happens when the dogs are clamped onto each other is that you need to break them off each other. So what you do is you restrain the dogs, slide the breaking stick into the space in the molars, and twist it sideways like you're revving a motor on a motorcycle. And what it does is mechanically levers the dog's jaws open. Now this will touch upon this right now, is the myth of the locking jaw of the pit bull. Doesn't exist. There's no mechanical locking mechanism in the skeletal structure of a dog, period. It's his desire to hold on to it in those half tennis ball size muscles that control his jaws. Now, one thing that people don't understand is 75% of a dog's power in its bite comes from its hindquarters. Because if you watch a dog who's in really good shape bite and pull on anything, you can see the core muscles tense from the back of its eyes all the way to its tail. Every single muscle is involved in that. It's like a cat. The cat gets startled. You see cats jump this high off the ground. It's because every single muscle is reflexing. And it's the same thing when dogs bite. So, just if you have anybody here who have dogs, if your dog's ever in a fight, straddle your dog over the top and pinch its hindquarters between your thighs, and you're going to the dog will pretty much almost always just freeze in place, and now you've taken away 75% of the problem. Isolating the dog's hips will solve most of your problems for a dog fight. And if it's not dogs like this, you get about another 3 or 4 minutes worth of work, and you can get them off each other with relative ease, because they're usually snapping at each other. You're usually not getting a dog that's going to bite and hold. So back to the dog fighting thing. We have breaking sticks. The referee calls a go. So what ends up happening is that on the go signal, we let our dogs go. Now, a dog like Marley, if there was another dog in this room, he wouldn't pay any attention to it as long as he's on a leash. Obviously, that's for safety. He won't go after a dog. If I grabbed a hold of him and squared him up on the other dog, the only thing that would go through his mind is, I'm going to kill that animal. He will start whining and crying, excited, when you give him a bath because he thinks he's going to fight. It's so ingrained in these dogs that people assume they can't be rehabbed. Well, what you do by teaching these dogs to fight and fighting them is you take away the pack instinct. These dogs hunt, eat, and live as a group. And by taking away that, you take away the essence of what makes them a dog. And typically there will be some ingrown aggression with these dogs, but if you don't teach them that by what's called a role, where you take a dog who's a year and a half to another dog who's a year and a half, and you kind of, with no real pressure, kind of encourage them to fight so they can kind of learn what they're doing. That first time that other dog bites him for real, that will be the last time he ever lets a dog near him in an aggressive manner that he isn't going to try to kill. You've now ruined that dog. Schooling those dogs, rolling those dogs, whichever the two terms you want to look at, that ruins this dog as a dog. The life on the chain and the life in the yard, you get a guy who's professional level fighter. He will have 30 dogs in a yard. How much interaction and relationship does he have with each one of those dogs? It's the saddest part about their life is they don't have a life. They live on a chain in a muddy yard with maybe a house, maybe. Maybe it's just a shanty over the top so they don't get rained on and a board to sit on. And the thing about it is, if you go to a place like that where somebody fights these dogs, they're all still happy. which is the biggest thing with these dogs. Is everybody assumes that you get a dog who's like that and it's going to be cross and try to kill you. The dog's been properly bred, it'll be fine. I wander off on tangents, so I apologize. So back to the dog fighting. So dogs come in, they hit each other, and they start going. Dogs fight for grips, whatever, biting the face, neck, arms, legs. Dogs, it's almost a dance. Some dogs are smart enough where they will actually fake, wait for the other dog to react, and then bite. It's almost like watching boxers. It's one of the most graphic things I've only seen a video of it. Never want to see that again. I love these animals too much to see that. It's way too upsetting. So the dogs are fighting, and one dog starts what's called a turn. So as they're fighting like this, you picture the two dogs head on head like this. They're fighting, one maybe on bottom, one maybe on top, whatever. If one dog starts turning and starts going shoulder to shoulder parallel, the dog's called what's made a turn. So now the two handlers get in, grab their dogs, break them off each other. Now the dog that turned has to make scratch. So the referee says go. I let my dog go. As long as he crosses that scratch line, he lets his dog go. And we do it again. And you keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it until legitimately the dogs either fight, one dies. There's 3 ways out of a match. You pick up, which means I know my dog will keep making scratch, but if I let him keep going, he's going to die, and I'm just going to forfeit any money I have bet on this. I'm going to forfeit any kind of record I have on the dog. I don't care. I'd like to save this dog's life because I know this is a good dog for breeding. I'm going to pick him up and walk out. It's called picking up. That's never done anymore. Dogs that lose are usually left in the pit while the winner celebrates, in shock, dying alone on a dirty floor, covered in their own blood, and are typically, if they don't die on their own, are typically electrocuted. Electrode to the ear, the other one to the testicles. And that's hooked up to a car battery. That's how these dogs meet their end, on a dirty floor on their side. And this is the real shame of this, is that these dogs are doing this for love. So I'm going to bring up Marley and tell you a little bit about him. Yeah, there you go. Marley is what is known as a Chinaman dog. That's the line of dog he comes from. Within dog fighting circles, Marley he's 4 times Chinaman. So if you look at his pedigree, the dog Chinaman comes up 4 times. Chinaman is a grand champion. Marley himself is what's referred to as a 2-time winner. He was fought twice. He won both matches. The funny thing about it is he's missing most of his top teeth because they rolled him. Because typically they'll roll a dog they'll school them at 18 months because their teeth have had time to set in their jaw. And they're pretty much as set as an adult as they're going to be. Marley here was rolled at 11 months, broke off all of his top teeth, breaking the other dog's front leg in the first 30 seconds of his roll. He was then matched at 1.5 years for the first time, no teeth, went 50 minutes. Second fight was 10 months later. Marley went 1 hour and 20 minutes. No teeth. Oh, I know. Went 1 hour and 20 minutes, and actually he sustained so much damage that they didn't think he was going to live. The other dog actually died about 10 minutes later from shock. Now, the type of damage we're talking about here is obviously, you guys can see, he does have some white flecks in his fur, some white spots, and that's because he looks like a brown cow on his chest. But he's got a lot of game scars on the fronts of his legs. These are white scar tissue. It's not fur. And after that first fight, he has a major scar on the top, dead middle of his muzzle. He had a hole in his muzzle the size of a quarter. Underside of his left arm, it's called the stifle, is this part of the dog's body. This scar here was completely exposed. All the veins, all the arteries hanging out. He had a bleeder on the left side. Dogs will live carried him through it, only to be rewarded by the guy who owned him by starving him for 4 months after nursing him back to health because he didn't have teeth, so they weren't going to fight him again. Marley came in as a rescue. My friend Tony is friends with the breeder who breeds this dog. The guy's name is Jack Kelly out in upstate New York. Jack called him and said, "Tony, listen, there's a guy in the area. He's got one of my dogs. He wants to give him up. No idea about the condition of him." He's like, "I know he he's told me XYZ, so he's a 2-time winner of this, that, and the other dog's history. Marley was matched and fought at 58 pounds. He weighs 68 right now, and this is a pretty good weight for him, but he's still putting on weight. You can see for a 4-year-old dog, he still lacks a lot of the fat deposits on the bottom half of his legs. Those are still coming back now. Tony rescued him in October. Marley weighed 40 pounds. Hadn't eaten in 2 months. Couldn't hold down solid food. Had to eat chicken broth and boiled down brown rice for 2 days before he could even eat a single piece of solid food. Couldn't stand up because his nails had all grown back into the bed of his paws. And when I first met him at about Thanksgiving, he didn't have hair from here to the end. Because of the vitamin deficiency, they lose their hair. He actually had giant bald spots. He had lost about 25% of his hair. His entire tail looked like a rat's tail. Big bald spots on his side here, all over his face. That's actually game scarring on his hip. But Tony, having 20 years of experience with the dogs, and he's put him back into some pretty good shape. He's pretty much just a little muscular tank. But Marley is, he's currently living life as a house dog. Tony's got 4 dogs. He's fine outside the kennels. He can look at them. He doesn't try to attack them through the kennel. Tony's got 3 kids, a daughter who's 12, a son who's 6, and Marley's best friend in the house is Nicholas, who is 4-year-old and a high-functioning autistic. Marley is used to emotional, verbal, and physical violent outbursts on a regular basis from a 4-year-old autistic boy. And Tony said this is the most trusted dog in the house. Not his Belgian Malinois, that's a police dog. Not his band dog, who's a half pit bull, that's a personal protection dog, but that's Attila. Attila loves the family, but still not trusted like Marley is. These dogs aren't beyond saving. Everybody assumes that as soon as you raid a place where they fight dogs, those dogs are all to be euthanized. They don't, they're not puppies. They're beyond saving. You can't fix a dog like that. I'm pretty sure that this is proof positive otherwise, and this is very, very atypical of the breed. This is what they're supposed to be. 150 years ago, this is what these dogs were, and this is still what they are today if you find the right ones. And for the most part, they are the right ones. 200 years, 20 years of bad breeding has got a lot of work stacked up against 200 years of proper breeding. Now,
Greg, who are you in relation?
Tony's somebody I've trained dogs with. We've trained with the same professional trainer, John Johnson at Canine Performance over in Reading. Tony's just a good friend of mine. He's the only person I trust to kennel my dogs. Takes great care of them. He's got a degree in animal nutrition and animal fitness, specifically for canines from Cornell Veterinary School. So he's someone I trust very much with dogs. And
what do you do with dogs? What's your relationship to dogs?
Grown up around them, obviously, and I have a Cane Corso. He's an Italian Mastiff, a direct line descendant of the Roman war dog. So he's about that tall and about 98 pounds, and he's a personal protection dog. Protected me somebody tried to mug me at knife point. They got bit for their troubles. He's a proven street dog, but Nick's met him on more than one occasion. He's as friendly as Marley is, and that's a dog that might actually bite someone this dog wouldn't. I've been around personal protection dogs, obedience dogs. I've helped out John do seminars for New Hampshire State Police, Nashua and Manchester police departments for their canines, being the bad guy running around in a building in the giant Michelin Man suit getting bit by canines.
Where did you go? I mean, obviously you're really well-informed. Really well-informed. Where did you learn them?
A lot of the stuff as far as these dogs go, I've never been at a place where I had a landlord that would allow the owning of one of these dogs. I rescued a 4-month-old female pit bull last spring, right about this time. She'd been locked in a closet for 5 days at 4 months old. And I homed her out with Chris Fraze, who trains a lot of the dogs for Maine State Police. And she's a I guess she's tiny. She's about 35 pounds, fully grown now. House dog. He's got 5 kids. Another story of how these dogs actually succeed in a family environment. She wasn't a fight dog, or she probably would have been if she'd been left there any longer. But a lot of it has to do with the breeding of these dogs. Like I'm very interested in the history of how these dogs develop, because it's a very similar way that, there's very limited books in the United States, and the ones that you can find in the United States about the Cane Corso, the dog that I have, most of them are written in Italian. Can't read and write Italian, so those books are kind of off limits for most people. And I have 4 or 5 of them, and I've had bits of them translated for me. But for the most part, these are very similar dogs in the way they work. They're working stock dogs. So these are dogs that, the Cane Corso uses a butcher's dog in Italy around the same time that these dogs were used as the butcher's dog in England. So it's a very similar breeding pattern, very similar aggression level. Granted, I don't deal with nearly as much animal aggression. In fact, I deal with none, which is so much easier. Stable dogs like that, where you don't have inbred or genetic disposition to animal aggression, is a lot easier to deal with. But that's pretty much how, just reading a lot of books, a lot of websites. Tony, having been involved with pit bulls for over 20 years, is a pretty good wealth of knowledge for a lot of stuff.
What is his involvement with pit bulls?
At one point in time, he owned a kennel breeding a lot of Chinaman and a lot of Bordeaux dogs, and had at one point in time fought dogs. And as he said, this is his penance in life, is to save dogs like this, as many that he can. Anytime he hears about a dog like this, he'll get a phone call from a breeder. He's like, for over 15 years, I haven't had contact with anybody from that world. I'll have guys call me and ask me if I want a puppy, and that's as much as I ever find out. He goes, and I'll go there and I'll take the puppy and I'll give it to someone I know will treat it like a house dog. And he's got Marley, he's got Joe, who's another rescue pit bull who was in a similar situation. And he had his Dixie last year, she died of cancer actually, but she was one of the sweetest dogs I've ever met.
So you're saying then that he used to breed dogs that might have been supplied
Yep.
for this fighting purpose?
Yep. And he made it,
The convert.
and he did at one point in time match them as well. And unlike most of the people I've met some people through dog training and through working dog events down south, especially where people will work pit bulls and work American bulldogs. You meet a lot of people who fight dogs down south. It's not an uncommon thing. People assume that you hear about Michael Vick, you hear about this person, you hear about that person. It is everywhere. DMX and the Rough Riders, everybody assumes that the Rough Riders, that's their big crew is a bunch of motorcycle guys, and it is. Like, the Rough Riders were a legitimate motorcycle, stunt riding motorcycle group out of New York. DMX and all of his friends made their bones on the street fighting dogs. That's where he gained his reputation as a badass, was from fighting dogs. It's a huge, huge business. Guys like DMX, guys like Michael Vick will bet $250,000, $300,000 on a match. And as long as people like that do that, it's going to be hard to stop it from being prolific like it is. It's any underground events like that.
What turned your buddy Tony around?
Just seeing the cruelty involved in it. Like, people didn't care. Like, his when he was breeding dogs, he had 3 to maybe 5 dogs tops at the house, specifically because he loved the animal and had some sort of connection. Tony didn't lose a single dog in the pit. He always picked up. And this is, as much as he's told me and is from what I've heard from other people, is that the one thing that people always in that circle, because we know dog's no good. Dog's fine. I'm going home with my dog. I'm not going to do it. It's not going any further. None of his dogs went past the second match.
So the practice has changed.
Yeah, as he said, it was never when he learned it from his uncle, who had been doing it since he was a teenager, and in a culture based on where that dogfighting isn't frowned upon. In a Portuguese culture, it's not something they don't think anything of it. A lot of countries over the world don't. In Russia, it's technically illegal to fight dogs, but it's completely legal to breed test dogs by having them fight once or twice. There's, that big, very dichotomy between, we don't want the idea of legalized dog fighting, but at the same time, people want to be able to test their dogs, and so that's what they do. You can weight pull with dogs to test gameness. You don't need to fight them. It's always about, it wasn't about cruelty, as he said when he first started doing it, and slowly but surely he saw people letting a lot worse stuff happen to dogs than absolutely needed to. And I've told him in the past, dog fighting, in my opinion, is completely morally reprehensible. It's absolutely disgusting. To see a dog like this, look like this, and realize that how much different would he be if he had been lived in a house with love and attention. He was never inside of a house for the first 3 years of his life. He lived outdoors in a pen. Now me and Tony I was over at Tony's house. Tony brings him outside. The dog keeps running back to the door because he thinks he's going to be left outside. We're on the far side of the backyard. Dog keeps running back to the door. He doesn't want to make sure he's left out. Completely driven by having not eaten for 2 months. Completely driven by food, toys, games, playing, attention. As you can see, completely gentle. Not snapping, licking out of your hand. He hasn't got a lot of obedience in him yet, but I just open up for questions. Anything you guys have?
Behind you.
Sorry.
Are there other jobs that are appropriate for these dogs?
Yep. There have been, there's more than a few. Actually, when I was in, granted this probably doesn't count, I was in Cozumel, Mexico. I saw 3 police canines that were actually pit bulls. In California, there's a woman who actually rescues working grade, like pit bulls with working drives, and uses them as search and rescue dogs. None of them are bred. Every one of them is found at a shelter. She's got 3 certified search and rescue dogs for California Highway Patrol that are pit bulls. I've seen them as narcotics dogs. The one thing that they're never good at is you can't get them to work as a police canine in the attack version of what the police canine does, for the simple reason that they just don't have that in them. And the few that I've seen that have that in them are just so over the top crazy that legitimately, for the safety of everybody, I'd say they should be euthanized. But that'd be the same thing. John had a Dutch Shepherd. Dog's name was Turbo. A complete, so pretty much a brindle German Shepherd, about 85 pounds. That was a complete and total liability to everybody. The day John got him out of the kennel from Holland, the dog tried to bite him, tried to bite his wife, within 20 or 30 minutes of being at the house. And one of the things that they do at the MSPCA when they get a pit bull in for rescue is if it chases something or it bites at something or uses its mouth on something, they say that dog's going to be aggressive. Show me a German Shepherd that won't do the exact same thing. There's not one on this planet. German Shepherds are chase dogs. They're bred on prey drive. They've been bred on prey drive for 100 years. Same thing. These guys just get a little more of a bad rap because of the mistreatment and the malignment of their breed.
Last weekend, I think it was last weekend, they had, don't ask me what channel, but they had the big national championship, and Holly, you might be able to help me out. It wasn't, the dog would do things with a frisbee, but as well as an obstacle course and all that. Yeah, an agility. And the dog that won was a pit bull.
Yep.
And then they interviewed the owner who had adopted the pit bull out of a shelter. I think watching that dog did more good for the breed
Absolutely.
on a national level than probably anything I've ever seen. People that I know that think, oh my God, pit bulls are the worst dogs, saw that and really rethought their breed. It's really. And what the guy was saying is, these type of dogs need something to do.
Yeah,
So
they're working dogs.
they're work dogs.
Yeah, they need if it's weight pulling, if it's tugging on a spring pole, if that's what they think their job is, that's what they're going to do, and they'll be happy to do it. You know, there's a really funny book, or it's kind of tragic. It's a book called The Dogs of Capitalism, and it's a history, and it's a lot of the stuff is pretty similar to what I was talking about today with the ratting terriers and all that, the full progression of the dog, and it's a very complete historical text, and then you get to the last chapter, and you realize by the time you're done reading it that the entire book has been written to push it towards a completely and totally pro-dog fighting point of view at the very end of it. In the last chapter, it completely loses all relevance for me, except of you break it down from like 1800s back. It's a great, great historical novel. You know, and most of it's based in fact. It's all cited. It works. You know, it's a legitimate work. And then the guy's opinion of the last chapter ruins it. And there's, a lot of people don't. It's hard to see the damage that's done, and that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand is, they see dog fighting. Oh, it's terrible, but a dog like Marley that's this social, this is normal, but this also shows you what kind of damage is done to these dogs physically. You see the scars, but at the same time you see them, and this goes full speed. He's lost half his ear. He's got a hole through one of his ears, but he's happy.
If you are able to stop at our animal law symposium around noontime, and I will work with Nick, and he'll get back to you over next week. I think the things, and Holly interject me, that I would like you to take just 15 minutes, even 10 is fine, and show there'll be hundreds and hundreds of people here and lots of kids to show this is a dog that was used in dog fighting, and do the little demonstration you did for us, showing the marks, and now what his life is like, and how really morally reprehensible dog fighting is. I think that theme with the kids, I think would be a great thing. And I think we'll have the bulk of the people around the noontime hour, so that would be a great opportunity to help out the breed.
Definitely. I'll definitely try to make it in.
That's great.
Something's moving.
Everyone should pet their dog.
Yeah, and everybody, you feel free to pet him. You guys want to give him a treat? I got I'll bring him out to the front, make this easier. Come on, Marley. Very welcome. Come on.